listening to The Gender Rebels.
I'm Kathleen, a cis woman and ally.
And I'm Faith, a trans woman.
Gender Rebels is a question and answer podcast that explores life outside the gender binary.
A big thanks to our Patreon supporters.
If you'd like to support the show, go to patreon.com/genderrebels. Hey everyone, I'm Kat.
And I am Faith.
Faith, I got a question.
Sure, go ahead.
It's inspired by a blog post from our friend at Hormones Demystified, HD. We have a couple episodes where we interviewed Dr. HD. He's an endocrinologist. Links down below for those episodes. But I was reading his most recent one, and it brought up a really interesting point, and I'm going to read it to you right now. This quote is attributed to a black transgender male. I went from the most invisible form in our society, a black female, to the most feared form in our society, a black male. And this one from actress Laverne Cox, a black transgender female. She said, "When I was perceived as a black man, I became a threat to public safety. When I was dressed as myself, it was my safety that was threatened." So my question for you is about how your status changed.
Okay.
Before and after. What you had or what you had to be concerned about before, and what you have or what you have to be concerned about now. I think in part this is sort of about privilege, but it's also about social perception.
Yes, but I mean, social perception plays a huge part in privilege because you get your privilege sort of assigned to you by society based on how society perceives you.
And perceives people like you. Yes. And has decided people like you are and should be treated and should act.
But there's also the sort of, it's more specific to you because say you are someone who is transgender, and as I've said many times on this podcast and in other places, what makes a person transgender is that they feel gender dysphoria. That's what makes you transgender. Feeling that dysphoria, feeling that like sense of being ill at ease, of being unhappy in the gender you were assigned at birth, that's being transgender. Not all transgender people choose to transition. Some may have various reasons why not to.
Some can't.
Some can't. And so, but they're still transgender. They're still absolutely transgender because they have those feelings. And so, if you're one of those transgender people who's not able, or it's not right for you to transition, then you're still transgender. You may be a trans woman, but people are going to perceive you as a man, because that's how you're going to be presenting. And so then you're going to be allowed the privileges that our society has decided that things are acceptable for men. And you are going to have those benefits as a male presenting person. And I feel like for non-binary people, this is going to be especially tricky because, non-binary people can be perceived as one of the two genders probably more often than not. And so that's probably very tricky for them. And if you're non-binary, I'd love to hear about that as well, because then it may be a situation where you're experiencing greater privilege one day or 1 hour than you are the next.
Yes. It's true. So then what was it like for you? How has that been different?
I think for me, the biggest feeling of having lost privilege probably comes from me feeling sort of less comfortable in spaces. And I have been presenting female off and on for decades. And I've been presenting full time for 2.5 years, almost 3 years now.
Wow.
And I know, right? It goes so fast. It seemed so impossibly difficult before I did it. And then it's just like, this Why didn't I do this earlier? This is so easy.
How I go to the grocery store.
It's just how I go to the grocery store. There are spaces I feel less comfortable in.
What spaces?
Part of the thing about being trans is you don't think of this as a privilege. Cis people don't think of this as a privilege, but kind of knowing a place, gendered places, where you know you're going to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. And as a trans person, I think we lose that to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. You know, as a cis person, that if you go in a women's restroom or women's changing room, you will be accepted there.
Like, it literally never even occurred to me.
Yeah.
That being accepted in one is a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know that if you go into the men's room, people are going to be like, what the hell?
Yes.
Or worse.
Please leave.
Yeah. For me, it's kind of not knowing how that might affect me. Like, I know we've been out and about, and, if I'm going to work or if I'm going out with friends, I'm gonna, put a lot of effort into my appearance. Mm-hmm. If it's a Saturday and it's, a lazy Sunday and we're just, hanging around the house and it's a rainy day and we're just let's go to the movies. Mm-hmm. And or let's go to a restaurant or something. Let's get out of the house for a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I'm lazy and I don't really want to do all my makeup and shit like that. Sometimes I don't know if I've vocalized this to you, but sometimes I've been I don't really want to go there because I know they're going to have binary restrooms. And I know this for places in our neighborhood.
Really?
And around the city of most... for instance, most bars and restaurants in New York City where we live tend to have single-use facilities.
Not necessarily male or female on the door. It just says bathroom on the door.
Yeah, because there may only be one bathroom, in each restaurant or things like that. But there are places with, the 2 stalls and a thing. And I have to think about that because I'm wearing, a hoodie and my hair is just in a ponytail and I've got no makeup on and maybe I haven't even shaved that day. Mm-hmm. And I'm not wearing a bra, and, so I have to think about that. I've lost the privilege of being able to just casually go in a anywhere. Gendered space.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So if I name a restaurant in our neighborhood, you'd be able to tell me if they're gendered or not?
I think ours does. I think our neighborhood really doesn't have...
I'm thinking of 4 or 5 places, and it's just bathroom.
The one place I can think of is the diner where Jack Antonoff and Lord hang out. That is one place in our neighborhood that I know has gendered restrooms. Mm-hmm. Other places...
it's just a series of single use.
It's a series of single use, but
single use or something. So that
is...
You're right. Wow.
Yeah, that is something as a trans person, I have to think about. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When I go to the gym, especially, I get kind of nervous because, it's the gendered. Gym. I'm very nervous. There's, the gym I go to, there's one in our neighborhood that does not have single-use spaces at all. Mm-hmm. So I kind of have to use the women's room. Mm-hmm. If I use the women's or the men's, it could potentially be awkward. Mm-hmm. And... that's why I like the one in Lower Manhattan because it's
single use.
It's not all single use, but they do have a couple single use spaces. So I feel that one given the opportunity, I will use a single use space anyway. I prefer them, but yeah. So that having that kind of privilege, which you don't think about generally, cis people don't think about. It's a privilege to use a gendered facility and not have to think about it.
And before you transitioned, when you were still presenting and pretending and having to do that, was that something you were still aware of? Someday if I transition, I'll need to know this. Or were you just I can go out however, I can go wherever?
I had been presenting part-time for years, for decades, like I mentioned.
So for that reason.
So I generally had gone into women's restrooms when I was presenting that way. Mm-hmm. I remember I was at a really big, huge party once, and it was a costume party. And it was one of the Rubelade parties.
I have no idea what that word means.
It's a big art party. They were huge, huge, warehouse parties. They were fun. And the women's room was like, had a ginormous line. And since it was a costume event, I was dressed as a girl, as I would have anyway. Mm-hmm. And I remember using the guys' room, which I wouldn't have normally because there was such a long line.
Nice.
Yeah. But
that's really cool.
Yeah, it was I got really weird looks, but it was fine.
That's not cool.
That's not cool, but
I was picturing you walking in and people being like, "Oh, hey," because it's like lady in the men's costume in the men's room.
Yeah. So that's like a big thing. I've also, it's something similar that I've lost kind of the ability, the privilege of being able to kind of go out in certain areas and know that I'm safe. Mm-hmm. And it's, I say certain areas, but it's really certain situations. And that could be, there's areas you could go at like 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. It's totally fine, but you go there at 2 a.m. on a Saturday and it's a whole different story.
Correct.
So there's situations where I may not feel as comfortable, you know, and I do have to think about my safety. When I see groups of youths, like I love that moment on 30 Rock where Liz Lemon sees the group of teenagers, she's like, youths, because that's kind of how I feel when I see a group of teenagers. I'm like, youths. Mm-hmm. And even when we were in like Germany, it was a field trip, I was still like, we were in the Reichstag, you know, and there were like a bunch of field trips and kids and stuff. I'm like,
and like a clump of 12, 13-year-old boys, 4 to 7 to 10 kids in a group. And it's like, I want to get as far away from that bunch of kids as I possibly just because, you know, so that having that, like the kids aren't going to give a shit 98% of the time, or 99.999% of the time they're going to be like all on their own stuff. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I just have that fear. And that's an opportunity to make fun of a stranger and seem cool. Oh, yeah. They're not going to let that go.
No. Yeah. So that's another thing. I think you know, as a trans person, that's sort of more on my mind. Although, I don't know, you're a woman. That's probably also there, I would think. I know for safety, I have to kind of be more conscious. But that may be just as a woman.
So were you, like, unconcerned about safety when you were still presenting as a guy?
I was less concerned.
Okay.
Because I remember I used to have a shaved head and wear all black and wear like a black trench coat. Like I probably didn't look like someone you would really necessarily, if you had to like pick people out of a subway car, for instance, to pick on, you probably wouldn't have gone to me first.
Yeah.
So, you know, there would have been other people. So I was less concerned. I was much less concerned about my safety.
What are precautions you've taken now that you didn't have to take then?
The biggest one is just to be more aware of my surroundings.
Okay.
I think that's the biggest thing.
But you do still walk around with your headphones in, right?
I do walk around with my headphones in. One trick I've learned is that if there's something going on and your spidey sense gets tingling, your Transie sense gets tingling, I will turn off the volume but keep the headphones in.
Yes.
So I can sort of spy.
Yes. And you want to honor that spidey sense. Your body has learned that. And really good book, The Gift of Fear. But yeah, if you get a sense, go with it.
Yeah.
Move to the other side of the car. Get off a subway stop early and wait for the next train. Or, you know, I'm assuming this is all happening on the subway.
I was on a subway. I was on a subway today, and there was a guy who I thought was talking on his phone, or like rapping along to his radio, but it turned out to be like a schizophrenic guy who was just
talking to the voices,
just talking, and you know, it was like, and he was like trembling weirdly. Anyway, it was just, I felt bad. Mental health in this country is something that we should be dealing with better.
And people with mental illness are more likely to be a victim of a crime than to perpetrate a crime. But it is still an element of unpredictability in your environment.
And that's where it gets your Transie sense tingling. So I just have to be a lot more aware, and I think, not making eye contact with people is another big one. I still do that accidentally sometimes, but I've kind of learned not to.
Yeah. The 1,000-yard stare is good. Have you ever tried that? You just look past their shoulder, but you focus your eyes 3 blocks away or something.
Oh, I see.
It's great.
Yeah.
Then you're ignoring them, but you're kind of seeing them.
I think as a transgender person, I think just that idea of like being in society and being accepted in society is something you do lose. And all facets of society.
Your cisgender.
You lose that cisgender privilege. Okay. So like freaking TSA, or like we talked about on our travel episode. Like, you got to think about where you're traveling.
Yes. Some places are very hostile.
And that is something that cis people don't have to deal with. Cis people are the, quote, norm. And so, or at least they're the vast majority of people. I guarantee you there are situations where people of African descent or people of, Muslims or...
brown people.
Yeah, any number of people may need to, like, also think that sort of thing through. Anyone who's, like, not, white cis male.
Oh, sure.
Has to think these things through. And as a white male, who people assumed was cis, I didn't have to think through any of that. I was the default for our society. I'm making finger quotes on default because it is the default, but it shouldn't be considered the default.
Right. It's the cultural default.
It's the cultural default.
Not the statistical default.
Oh, no. They're a vast minority.
Yeah.
So
women exceed men, Asians exceed Caucasians. Yeah.
Yeah.
The numbers don't add up.
The numbers, even in the United States, they don't add. Like, white males are like 25% of the population or something crazy. We can look up the actual statistics, but it's... Why do you think everything's gone haywire? Because they're afraid of losing their privilege. It's all about privilege.
They would say it all went haywire because we're not 50% anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So what was your thing you asked me at dinner? You were like, this might sound turfy, but...
Oh, gosh, my turfy thing. Okay, so it kind of has to do with privilege, which is why we're talking about it now. And please, listeners, don't hate me. This is the thing I kind of sort of wondered about before I really knew about trans people and knew any of the stuff that I've learned over the time that I've been talking to you. But it had occurred to me before we did an episode on this that we know more about trans women than we do about trans men. We see them in the news more. We hear about them. The famous ones are trans women. Why is that? And my assumption, which was incorrect, but my assumption was that's because these women have gone through their whole lives knowing that their opinion mattered and that they get to take up space and make noise. And they learned this stuff from being raised male, even though they weren't. And now they finally get to be true to themselves and true to the world, and they're actually female, but they have these habits. They have this upbringing and this experience of mattering, taking up space. People will listen to me when I talk.
Yeah.
I do get to be in charge. And my assumption, and I don't think this is true, but it'll be worth discussing at least, is that's the difference between trans women and trans men. Is trans men were raised the opposite. Be quiet. Behave. You don't get to do that. That's not for you. We don't want to hear you talk. You could just go away. And you don't matter as much, And then they finally get to be who they are and come into this world of male privilege. And you've left the world of male privilege. But you have that upbringing.
Yes.
And...
This isn't sounding turfy yet.
Oh, that's the turfy part, though.
Is it?
Well, the whole thing is, my belief now, is that we know more, and we see more, and we think more about trans women, media-wise, than trans men, because it is a greater deviation.
I think that's absolutely true,
I think that captures the eye and the mind and the imagination and the headlines and the clicks. And that's why.
I remember years ago seeing an interview with Scott Thompson back in the 90s. Scott Thompson from Kids in the Hall. Sketch comedy group known for their cross-dressing and sketches.
Link down below.
Everyone should know the Kids in the Hall.
You never know.
Okay.
We've international listeners.
And Scott Thompson said, when asked the question about that, said that, I think the question they asked was, why is a man in a dress funny, but a woman dressed in a suit isn't? And he said that he had read that it is because the man is lowering his status. And I think that is true, and I think that extends to why our society seems far more interested in trans women than trans men. Is because I think it is, one, our society tends to be interested in the rather pretty and striking trans women. And I think it's also that it is someone doing something that's so shocking because they are giving up all this male privilege.
Why would you do that? Why would you
crazy.
Want to do that?
Yeah,
yes.
Why would you want to do that? Why would you lower yourself, to that level? Why would you give up all of this? You must be mad. And so I think there is a level to that. We were talking about, you were watching some I Am Jazz.
I was.
Jazz Jennings reality show, and I was like skeptical about that because I was like, isn't that just is that sort of look at the freak, and so I wonder if all of the fascination with trans women
look at the freak?
Isn't, hey, look at the freak, which is why they're not really talking about trans men, because everyone would want to be a man.
Of course
obviously,
you want
that's
to be
the
male.
default.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I guess my question for you is, do you think there is anything to your background, your habits, how you were raised, how you were treated with respect and worthy of being listened to? Like, do you think that has any basis? Because I'm leaning away from that personally. I don't think that.
I think I wrote a piece about why I dislike the term TERF. I think, did we do an episode about that?
We like to do positive
we
episodes.
do.
We're trying to entertain you guys.
I wrote an essay about why I dislike TERF as a concept. And it's one, because it's pejorative.
And I would say they deserve it, but continue.
Okay, I would say that you're never going to have a good argument, or you're never going to build a consensus with someone when you come at them first with a pejorative. Two, I think we have more in common and greater enemies than each other. And so I think, I don't like the term TERF. I don't agree with them, obviously. People like Jermaine Greer, I think they're just assholes. But,
so you'd rather we just say asshole instead of TERF?
Yeah.
All right. Sometimes you want to categorize your asshole.
I guess you do.
When selecting your weapon.
One of the things that these writers and thinkers and people, these so-called feminists will say, is that trans women aren't women because they've experienced male privilege. So they have a different
approach to the world.
And they have a different experience than cis women.
So you're automatically disqualified no matter what your brain says.
Here's the thing. One, I think, yes, we absolutely do have a different experience.
Okay.
I have experienced male privilege. I absolutely have. I have also experienced lack of cis privilege, which these women haven't. And so I think that gives me a different perspective than theirs. And so what? We all have different experiences. We all experience different types of privilege and different levels of privilege. And I don't accept that these so-called feminists, these assholes, get to be the people who can be the gatekeeper of all that is womanhood. Because they're not. Because one, there's no platonic ideal of women, of what it is to be a woman. There is no singular way you can say this is a woman.
I mean, we know what they would fall back on.
I know what they would fall back on.
That.
But
the uterus.
But some women are born without a uterus. Some cis women don't have uterus. Some cis women have their uterus removed. Some cis women are genetically male.
Oh, I'm not saying it's a good argument. I'm just saying what they would say.
I'm saying they would, so it's complicated, and I don't think they get to be the gatekeeper. And so I disagree with them on a lot, but I don't disagree with them on the idea that I have had a different experience, and that, yes, I have experienced male privilege. And
as splendid as they must imagine that is, you also experienced fucking dysphoria.
I did for years.
Yeah.
And I've also, because of people like that, worried, when I was first really kind of dipping my toes into this, worried that I would be kind of accused of, like, colonizing women's spaces,
Invading.
Yeah. And, I had to worry about that because of people like that. And again, cis privilege on their part, because they don't have to worry about shit like that.
Yeah.
And so I think trans people's experiences are all unique. We're all different in our own way. Experiences don't define us. They don't limit us, so obviously I have experienced male privilege, but I've also lost that privilege and lost a lot of other privileges along with it. I've gained what I think is a privilege of being happier with myself. I've gained the privilege of being able to, like, express who I am in a way that does make me happy. Oh my God, I went out to work the other day and I was, like, feeling friggin' fantastic.
With that picture you sent, you looked so cute that day.
Thank you.
Did you put that on Instagram?
I did.
Awesome.
So,
all right, link down below. You should see.
But I get to have these days where I'm just like, yes, I'm rocking it today, and I get to have that, and I never had that when I was a guy.
Yeah.
Never once had that feeling, and so I do gain some things. I gain a lot. I gain so much, and trans people gain so much from this. We do lose some things, or in the case of, trans men may gain some things.
Yeah.
But they also do lose some cis privilege.
I have a question for our trans guy listeners, actually. And guys, I want to hear from you and respond on Twitter or questions at Gender Rebels or info at Gender Rebels or Facebook. How was that for you when you are presenting as a guy and suddenly you have male privilege? Suddenly people aren't interrupting you in meetings. People are stepping out of your path on the sidewalk. What was that like? Was that weird? Was that awesome? Was it kind of enlightening? I would love to hear how this is on the other end of things, where you grew up trying not to take up space because that's not ladylike, and now all of a sudden it's weird if you don't. We would love to hear from our trans guy listeners.
And that's something I also have to worry about. I don't know if this is just a female thing or if this is a trans thing, of, like, I have to play catch up on that socialization.
Sure.
I have to know to smile as my default.
Yeah.
To not get visibly upset, and I'm still fighting myself on that.
Sure.
I have to learn to just not snap at people when they're wrong and be like, that's completely wrong.
That's stupid.
Yeah. And so I have to learn these things, and it's catch up, and trans men, as you mentioned, I bet have to play catch up as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's hard. It is something that we have to consciously put effort into, and not that I think these socialization should be the norm, or that we should be socialized this way, because both roles are shitty and
restrictive.
Shitty and restrictive. Yeah. And I would like us to all be more understanding and
I would like kids to
respectful.
Be raised in an equal way. Yeah.
And so, but I have to play catch up on that. And that's something I have to devote mental energy to.
So then my question about that, and we have to wrap up at some point, and I have a couple other questions, but this is really interesting, is girls don't get to take up as much space. Girls need to smile more. Girls need to be like, well, actually, so what you're suggesting is something we tried already? And what we found, instead of saying, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Like, you have to do that. You don't have to do that, obviously. But, it's better. It certainly is more in keeping with how females are conditioned to behave. And you're saying you're playing catch up. You're learning this now. Did you start that study when you started transitioning, or have you been paying attention to that your whole life?
Certainly I'm like taking up less room physically.
Mm-hmm.
You can take up room physically. You can also take it up emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
But the other stuff, I think since transition, it's been something that's, it's that I really did have to kind of learn.
Yeah.
Because I never thought about it that way.
Yeah. So when you transitioned, you found there was a lot more to learn than you expected.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then my last question, this is only slightly related, but it's always been interesting. I always want to kind of work it into an episode. And it has to do with public perception. So I want you to think back before you transitioned. And someone comes up to you. They have 2 buttons you could press, one or the other. And one, you change.
Oh, I remember this one.
Yeah.
One is you get the body you want, but everyone still perceives you as your birth gender.
Mm-hmm.
The other is everyone perceives you as not your birth gender, but you
don't get that body.
You don't get that body. It's just shitty.
I know.
Would you rather?
Yeah. But you can only have one. People can perceive you the correct way, or you can be the correct way. You don't get both. Something is always going to be wrong.
Yeah.
Which would you prefer?
Dead air. Just dead air.
It's a complicated question.
I don't like either answer. I would say
you want both?
Probably this. Yeah, you do want both. I mean, if I had to pick, maybe the socialization, but that's not all of it. So,
So if you had to pick,
yeah,
you're at gunpoint. You have to push one of those buttons. You would pick. Everyone perceives me the way that I feel.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, it's still shitty. That's kind of like being trans and not transitioning.
Except they don't perceive you that way.
They don't perceive you that way.
Yeah.
But that incongruity
yeah,
is definitely a hallmark of dysphoria. So all
I also sort of don't like this question because
it's just turning one type of dysphoria for 2 other types of
two
dysphoria.
Different things. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like, would you rather have your heart removed or your kidneys removed? Well, in that case, kidneys.
It would take me longer to die. Yeah.
They can hook. Well, in both cases, they can hook you up to machines.
True.
But it's a weird. It's a shitty question.
Yeah.
I've heard it asked.
Maybe I'll cut this part out.
No, I don't think it's I think it's an interesting question.
Going so long.
Yeah, I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on it, but
listeners, let us know.
Yeah,
what you think. You don't have to choose one or the other, but if you did, which matters more to you?
Would you rather have a regenerating meatloaf or a wallet of infinite talc?
Meatloaf. Duh. What do we do with all that talc?
Would you rather? Would you rather be unable to distinguish babies and the taste of mint, or to be unable to distinguish English muffins from the concept of increasing?
Babies and mint.
Okay.
I can avoid both.
Yeah.
The concept of increasing is really hard to avoid.
It is.
Well, also, listeners, if you have any other stupid comparisons to pick between, I would love to hear them.
This is a game we played a lot in college, and the more absurd, the better.
I was studying
Everyone always wants to go sexual with these things, and I preferred going like completely esoteric and philosophical.
I was in the fucking lab.
Yeah.
Why weren't you working in college?
Should have taken an easier major, science person.
Wish I had. Well,
yeah.
I think we've all learned a lot today.
I think we have.
I've
if you're in
ruined my
college,
life.
take the easiest major you can. By the way, it's communications. Or kinesiology. That's what all the athletes did. I assume that one must have been a breeze.
No, there's anatomy in that.
Is there? Okay.
Exercise physiology stuff. Anyway, much was learned.
Much was learned. Thank y'all for tuning in.
Thanks for helping
on here on your
telling me all
podcast dial.
Interesting information.
Yes.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
We will talk to you next week.
All right, everyone.
Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us keep making more great content, go to patreon.com/genderrebels.
We have many different levels of support and lots of great rewards,
including drinks with the Gender Rebels at Stonewall.
Please leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That makes it easier for other people to find us.
And send your questions to questions@genderrebels.com or find us on Twitter @The Gender Rebels.
Music for The Gender Rebels is by Jasper the Colossal. Follow the link down below or download them on iTunes today.
And for all our episodes, visit genderrebels.com.
The Gender Rebels is a Comeback Sync production, copyright 2019. All rights reserved.
And to all you gender rebels out there, keep rebelling.
Bye. Bye. Places and it's just bathroom.
The one place I can think of is the diner where Jack Antonoff and Lord hang out. And
Lord's been there once.
She's been there once. No, it's like Jack Antonoff. He's a musician and producer. He's that's like his favorite diner. He lives in our neighborhood, and that's his favorite diner, and he goes there all the time. And he sings its praises, even though their food's not very good.
Link to this guy's Wikipedia
Lord
page.
worked for him Lord worked with him on her last album, Melodrama. They were possibly dating. I have seen her around our neighborhood. She has posted Instagrams around our neighborhood. She posted an Instagram from that diner once, but I bet you she's been in there multiple times.
Fine. Lord's Diner has gendered bathrooms.
She also, Lord really likes diners. She does.
And Faith really likes Lord. I'm not sure if y'all are catching on to that.
Yeah, anyway. So, that is one place in our neighborhood that I know has gendered restrooms. Mm-hmm. Other places...
it's just a series of single use.
It's a series of single use, but
single
yeah.
use.